So, all of us know that if we are not careful, ministry can feel very busy. And so, today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 6 practical things you can do to live at a sustainable pace.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androsian, and with me today and every day is Dylan Dodson. And today we're going to give you 6 ways to live at a sustainable pace.
A sustainable pace in ministry, how you can do it, why it's important.
Yep.
And speaking of sustainable pace, if you go to thechurchco.com/practical, you can get the best church website possible for you. What does that have to do with sustainable pace? Well, why spend a lot of money and a lot of time on a frustrating website that doesn't even look good?
That's right.
When you can get one done, plug and play for you, mobile friendly, super fast. We say this every time. We use this for New City's website and for Practical Church Planting's website. We've used them for years. We've recommended them for years before they became a sponsor and partner with us. So if you want a new website by Easter, you want a better one, or one that looks really good, go to the Church Co. Go when you get checkout, put practical at the promo code. You get 40% off for your first 2 years. You get to pay less than we get to pay. And they're a sponsor here. And
right.
We will pay them more than you pay them to do it. And it's awesome. Their customer support is great. If you have any questions, you can check out different website or different designs on their website of other churches that are currently using it. But thechurchco.com/practical and type practical for the promo code at checkout, 40% off for your first 2 years. Could not recommend it enough.
Yeah, it's really one of the cheapest and highest quality website builders that exists.
That's right.
It's kind of a ripoff for them, is what I've landed on. But
so Paul, who leads it, literally told me that because of their price point, and especially now with 40% off, but because their price point is a lot cheaper than other website builders, people don't use them because they don't think it's good enough.
I believe it.
And he's like, no, we're just trying to help churches, and especially church plants that don't have a lot of money. And so it's really good.
It's definitely worth the time and money.
So last episode, we talked about, less is more, and kind of we referenced living for the long haul in ministry. Mm-hmm. And so in this episode, we're going to give you some practical ways, 6 practical ways, to live at a sustainable pace, to not feel guilty about not doing stuff all the time, so that you can last for the long haul, but you can be healthy, your family can be healthy, and that therefore your church can be healthy. Mm-hmm. And so here are some practical things you can do to live at a sustainable pace, or as John Mark Comer in his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which I highly, highly recommend, he talks about living at a Jesus pace. Jesus has a lot of things to do, but you can't read the Gospels and see a man who was busy in our sense of the word, and yet he changed the world. And so if he's our model, here are some ways that we can model that, I think, in our lives. Number 1, schedule big rocks at the beginning of the month. And so the things that are really important, I don't know, many of you may have seen or listened to, Brian, have you ever heard like the example where like the professor takes the jar and he has like rocks and sand and a couple other things, and he like puts the sand in first and the big things don't fit. Yeah. And then he puts the rocks in first and then everything else fits.
That's right.
It's super cheesy.
That's where the idea comes from.
But it's really true, especially as we reflected a last episode as New City is coming up on 5 years. Really seeing this play out. And so one of the things that, at least how I do it to make sure that the important things happen, is at the beginning of the month, put date nights on the calendar. I've got a 7 and 4-year-old, 7-year-old daughter, 4-year-old son. And so once a month I'll take them out to eat and just to do something fun, just me and them. So I'll put that on the calendar. If there's like certain times that I want to dedicate to prayer, I'll put that on the calendar. I will block things out, or making sure the important things are put in there, and then ministry just has to fall into the rest. Now, there is still a lot left. It's like, this is not like I'm just going to sit at home and not do anything. Yeah. Not that at all. But because all these things that come up, you can feel this eternal pressure or internal or external pressure to do all these things. It's really easy to fudge, like, oh, this is not as important, so I'm not going to do it because this thing is really urgent right now. And then you'll find yourself burnt out, not in a healthy place. Your marriage is not in a healthy place. Your family's not in a healthy place. The church, therefore, will eventually not be in a healthy place. And so whatever the important things that you are convicted of, or you have been led, or you have been told that these are wise things for you to do, as someone in ministry, a season of life that you're in, whatever, I just have found the easiest way to make sure that they get done is at the beginning of the month, put them on the calendar, and then make everything else schedule around it. Of course, things might have to come up and you might have to move it, but it's really easy. Like if I have to move something with my kids, for example, that I'm going to do with my kids. Well, the fact that it's already on the calendar and I have to move it means it's going to be rescheduled, but it's also going to be on the calendar. As opposed to, well, I think I need to take my daughter on a date this month. I'll do it at some point. And then the end of the month comes and you never did it. And so anyway, schedule the big rocks at the beginning of the month, and that will ensure that they will actually happen.
And I think for most stages of life, if not all, the big rocks are not ministry rocks. So this isn't just I mean, it kind of with what you're saying, but this isn't just schedule your big ministry things at the beginning of the month and everything else will fall in.
Yes.
Schedule everything that's not ministry and then make ministry fall into place.
Yep.
Like this, I don't know that it should ever. Well, I do know that it should never be the most important thing in your life. Of the church should never be the most important thing in your life. Like your relationship with Jesus should. Don't get me wrong, but just ministry related, scheduling things at the church, even meeting with people, which is really important, or events, whatever, should never be more important than if you have a family, then your family, then your personal relationship with Jesus. So making sure those are prioritized, and then make ministry fall into place. And it always will. Like it
always will.
It will never be a problem.
Yeah.
You're never going to overschedule your personal time with Jesus and make the church suffer because of it. Like it'll always be better for the church to put other things above the church in that sense. And make the church fall into place.
Yes.
And that's a good thing to a good pace to set for when you bring other leaders on board as well, to see if they see you doing it, then they'll do the same as well.
I am increasingly convinced. I've always been convinced, but I'm just always more and more convinced, even coming out of COVID, all the crazy stuff, that there are certainly exceptions to this. There are seasons where this is not the case, but the overwhelming majority of the time when we are overwhelmed, have too much going on, it is our fault because we didn't prioritize our calendar and we were just reactively going along with everything.
Yeah.
We haven't set boundaries. We haven't put the right things in place. And so we've got too much going on. But if you schedule it, you'll realize, oh, I have to get my other work done in this time, and you will get it done. And just, again, 5 years into this, slowly learning these things, that when you are healthy and you're in a good place and your marriage is in a good place and your family's in a good place, and you will be a better pastor, you will be a better leader, you will be better at your job.
Yeah.
And so this actually is not just because it's, you should care about your family and your life. It actually makes you better at what you're doing, which of course makes sense. If you're healthy, then your job's going to be better. And so scheduling things ahead of time, putting them on the calendar, because then what happens is you actually will like, oh, I need to get my other job again done in this amount of time. You'll actually do it as opposed to sitting around and wondering and waiting till the last minute, or maybe not last minute, but being reactive with everything. Being proactive with as much stuff as you can be makes a huge difference.
And it comes into play when you don't have a lot going on too.
Yep.
Like it's not good to have too much going on, obviously, like you're saying, but it's also it can be really hard to have not much going on, because you have a little bit going on, a ton of free time. It's easy to fit it in whenever.
Yes.
But that whenever never happens, or that whenever happens in times that it shouldn't. And so be proactive with your time and be scheduling your time even when you think it's not necessary. Because sometimes those times when it feels not necessary are the times where it's going to make the biggest difference.
Yep. So that's the first thing. Schedule the big rocks at the beginning of your month. That's a really practical thing you can do. The second thing, or really with this episode, maybe not all of these are necessarily new things we've talked about, but what we like to do is put them all in one episode.
That's right.
So here's are some other things we've talked about. Talked about this one recently a lot. Number 2 is to solidify your boundaries, whether that's your marriage or sexual, which we'll talk about, or work. But like knowing exactly what you want to do, what your boundaries are, that you, if you're married, that you and your spouse have agreed to, that you're both comfortable with, makes it really easy to fit ministry and work into its appropriate places. So with marriage, it's like, date nights or, amount of work, like ministry work nights you'll do per week. Like what is that number? And being intentional about it. And there might be exceptions, but they're the exception and not the rule. So it makes it really easy to say no. With work, like on average, on what days are you, and it could be different on different days and seasons of life, whatever, but just communicating, hey, when am I going to be done? On average day, I'm going to be done about this time. I'm going to shut it off and I'm going to be done. I'm not going to check my email after this time. I'm going to take a Sabbath, that sort of thing. Like, what are my boundaries? When it comes to sexual, it's like, pornography. Do I have filters in place? Do I have someone holding me accountable? Is my spouse comfortable with our current setup to make this happen? Because again, if you're not proactive about this, it will be a problem for you if it's not already. And so, setting those boundaries, again, makes it really easy, because then it makes it a lot easier for you to say yes or no to things. So again, I said this a couple weeks ago, it's just a really recent practical example. Like right now, Christine and I are doing pre-marriage counseling for 4 couples, which is a lot at a time. And because Christina tries to be at them too, we try to do them together. But because this happened, it's like, we've committed to certain nights a week. People have to come in the afternoon. They have to come off early from work, or, Christina's not going to be at all of them. And like, that's just okay. And it makes us really easy to say no, or here's what it's going to be, because we had the boundaries in place. If not, we would have, we would have just said yes. And I was actually thinking about this. We do 6 sessions. We might switch it up, but for right now, we do 6 sessions. And one of the couples, I told them I can only do 4, and so that means we have 22 sessions we got to do, and we have to get all of them done because 2 of them were kind of last minute, which is why this happened.
Yeah.
In the span of 3 months. Well, that's 22 nights if you do them. I mean, that's like 2 a night, 2 or 3 a week.
Yeah.
And that's just not. And 3 years ago, I might have been like, whatever. And like, there's no reason to do that. It's not like an emergency. And so, yeah, solidifying your boundaries just makes that a lot easier. So you and your spouse are comfortable with what you're going to do, so you can say yes and no to the right things.
I've become more and more convinced that I don't have data to back this up, but just in what I've kind of observed, that one of the biggest reasons for things like for bad, so to speak, marriages that are falling apart, whether that's affairs or other things, is kind of stems from a spouse resenting the other. I'm convinced that that's one of the biggest reasons. Not just an affair happened, but what led to that, I think, oftentimes is resentment. And I think this is one of the easiest ways to prevent that, but that resentment can happen a lot easier than a lot of us think.
Yes.
And one of the ways it can happen is in ministry. If you're constantly working, especially whether you have kids or not, but especially if you have kids, if you're not present at home, or when you're present, when you're physically present, you're not mentally present because you're working on your phone or you're texting people about church or whatever. You may not be necessarily doing anything that's like in and of itself wrong. Like, you think you're working on the church, that's obviously a noble thing to do, whatever. Yep. But if you're neglecting your family, I think that's a super quick way to lead to kind of this low key or low grade resentment that just builds over time. And so having these boundaries put in place, that these are the times I'm going to do these things and these are the times I'm not going to do these things, is way more helpful than I think a lot of us give it credit for. Yeah. So just to put this in practical sense. So right now, in our family, I work full time at the church. Obviously, I'm also a full time student. So I go to school from home, online. But I went back to school last year and working in school full time. I also have a part time job on top of this that I've just like a side gig, not like part time job, but like a side gig that I do to help out as well. And so there's a lot of things going on. And if I don't schedule those things, then I can easily be accidentally working all day long. Now, one of the things I said when I started doing, especially going back to school, because it was something I've wanted to do for a long time, but wasn't like a thing I necessarily had to do. Like, obviously, it wasn't a requirement to work at the church or anything. Is I said, I'm going to try this. And if it's taking away from the family, then I'm not going to do it. Because I think it's valuable and I want to do it, but it's not worth, obviously, it's not worth ruining my marriage over it. But not even ruining, it's not worth sacrificing my marriage over. It's not worth missing my son's first couple of years of his life over just so I can do this. And so I was like, we're going to try this. And if I can't fit it in at times that's not affecting the family, then I'm not going to do it. And I found you can if you're proactive about it. And like, so I made a joke to my wife about this the other day. I was like, if you didn't see like that I had grades and things, you would probably have no idea I was going to school, because I do this before you wake up. And I'm able to schedule that, like what time I go to bed and what time I wake up. But I care about what I'm doing, but I don't care about more than spending time with my wife, or care about it more than like playing with my 2-year-old son or seeing him grow up. And so you can the goal shouldn't be to do more things and just constantly do more things. But I think you can, if you create boundaries and are proactive with your time, like back to these first couple things, you can probably fit in more than you expect and have it not affect your marriage. But if you're not proactive, if you're not setting boundaries, then I think you'll get a lot less done, which can be problematic. And that's not the biggest issue, but you'll get less done while having a negative impact on your family or your relationship with Jesus. So it's kind of a worst case scenario on both fronts.
Yep. So solidifying your boundaries, when you're going to do what, making sure your spouse has agreed to them and they're comfortable with them, to help avoid resentment. Because one of the things that happens is your spouse wants you to do well, so they'll support you. They want the church to go well, and then it's just been going on for way too long, and you've created unhealthy habits that you can't break out of, and it's a big problem.
Yep.
And so you can live sustainably. If you have boundaries, it will force you to be okay, as we said last episode, to do less, not have to do stuff all the time, but because this is important. And you will experience the benefits of it if you commit to it. Then you won't go back.
Yep.
So number 3, which has to go with a little bit with what Brian was talking about too, is a weekly calendar. And we talk about this a lot because I think this can be a problem for a lot of people, but particularly in ministry where you feel, I think incorrectly, that your job is just based on what everyone else needs and when they need it.
Yeah.
That you should have a weekly schedule of work rhythms of every week. Again, there are exceptions, emergencies happen, whatever. But generally speaking, this days I'm working on this stuff, and not even these days. This time I'm working on sermons. If you preach regularly, or whatever weekly tasks you have, or whatever creative things that whatever takes a lot of focus, I would recommend the things that take you the most amount of focus and energy should be scheduled every single week, the same time, and you should schedule them when you want to do it. If you're bivocational, this is a little bit different, but if you're not, when do you want to do it? Like, when are you most focused and energized and present? That's when you should do sermon prep or things that are really important to your job.
Yep.
And the things like the tasks that don't require a lot of focus and attention, that are just kind of easier or more menial, those are the ones that should be moved around and be flexible, and you should do not when you're at your best. But if you have a weekly calendar, you can get way more done because you've prioritized your time, you've been intentional with it, and you not feel burnt out all the time. Yeah. And so for me, it's different. Like Brian talked a little bit about, he has got a rhythm for his school, like when he does his schoolwork. Like, for me, I think for a lot of people, the morning time, because that's when you're awake. Now, it could be different based on when you get up and that sort of thing. Yeah. But like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I don't schedule meetings in the morning. Like I'm doing sermon prep or working on sermons or writing stuff or whatever. Or like we do this on Monday mornings at 10 a.m. is when we record this. Mm-hmm. But that's like, we want this to be good. And so we do it at a time where we are more focused.
That's right.
But it's like, it's every single week. And so we're not wondering. And then in the afternoons, that can be flexible. I've mentioned in a lot of episodes, even a couple of previous ones, like how I do my schedule. So I'm not going to rehash that here. But I have a weekly calendar where I know when I'm going to do my main things every single week. They're on the calendar. They're time blocked of like, this is how long it's going to take me. So it makes me focus when I'm doing it. And you get more done so you can focus on the things that matter. And of course, they're flexible. You can move things around. But I would just highly encourage you, like you should know, generally speaking, you should get to the place. It might take you a while to figure out what's good for you, but work this out and you can figure it out. Like what days you're doing what, and also what times you're doing what, so that you can just get in a rhythm and a practice. And you're not wondering when should I do this thing, or what time of the day should I do it? If it's already on your schedule, you just have to do it. It doesn't take the brain power debating it with yourself about whether or not you should do it.
Yeah, and it really helps to not just have a time when you're doing things, but a time when you're ending things and doing the next thing. Because I think we can all get in this where if you're doing something you like if you potentially you really like sermon prep, you could accidentally, especially early on, do it for half the day.
Yeah.
Because and maybe you're actually enjoying it and it's a time when you're energized and whatever, but then you realize you're not getting, there's all these other things that you aren't taking care of. And you're honestly like, if you're spending, people may disagree. If you're spending too much time on sermon prep, you're probably not making a better sermon. Like you need to spend a good amount of time on it, but just spending an unending amount of time on it probably isn't beneficial. Yeah. And so having an ending time will not just help you hurry to make sure you're done by that time, but it'll give you a good place to stop and a good place to pick up potentially tomorrow or next week, whenever the next time it's on the calendar. But I think you can accidentally just kind of work unendingly in a task or in a thing if you enjoy it and neglect everything else.
Yep.
And so one thing I'll add is you mentioned we do this in the morning, record this podcast in the morning at 10 a.m. We didn't always record it in the morning. We used to record it in the afternoon. And I remember when we used to do this in the afternoon, I would not look forward to recording. Like it's because you're drained in the afternoon. It's not that I didn't want to do it. But when we shifted this to the morning, it's much more enjoyable, I think, because that's a time when we both have more energy, and that's time that we kind of enjoy working a little bit more in the morning. And so this isn't just random ideas, but this is actually like really helpful. And if you do these things in the afternoon or at a time where you're less energized, then it will have an effect on your work. And so there's certain things to schedule for those times. It's not like just take a nap all night or all afternoon. But if you're strategic with what you do at what times a day, you'll really not just get more done. That's not necessarily the goal, but I think you'll really enjoy your workday a lot more.
And I would encourage, if you have any repeating tasks that take longer than 30 minutes, like my opinion, having like a task list in the beginning of the day is just terrible, because you have to decide like when to do what and how long it's going to take. If it takes longer than 30 minutes, you need to put it on your schedule, on your calendar, and give it a time frame. So you have a time limit. I'm going to focus on it. I'm going to do it. But having a weekly rhythm, and then of course you're like, what about meeting with people? I recommend using something like Calendly. You can get it for free, and it syncs with your Google Calendar or whatever you use. And so people can choose, you already have your preset times that they can't choose. Yeah. They can choose from all your available times, and then you can meet. And almost always people choose one of the times you're available. Yeah. There can be exceptions. I always say, here's my calendar. Pick whatever time works for you. If none of them work for you, let me know. We can find another time. I mean, it happens hardly ever.
Yeah.
It hardly ever happens where that doesn't work out that way. So weekly calendar, scheduled work rhythms help you live a sustainable pace for the long haul.
That's right.
Number 4, be okay with only doing what you can do. We've talked about this a lot, often, especially with ministry or with your church, feeling like discouraged because you want to do all these things that you can't do. And if your church is not at the stage, the financial place, you don't have the leaders to not do certain things. It's not that you shouldn't still be proactive and strategize and plan about how to do them, but also just being okay. Like being okay that you can't do everything, you can't be everything, you're not going to be good at everything. Just, I don't know, getting comfortable with what you're good at and the time that you have. And this also, I think, helps with the boundaries. Like I have, other things in life are important, like my marriage, my family, my health, exercise. These are important. And so scheduling those things mean I work a little bit less. Like if you never exercise, you have technically more time in your week. But if you do have times in your week where you exercise, well, that reduces the amount of time you could be doing something else.
Yeah.
But it's worth it, right? It's worth it to be healthy. And so being okay with, I've done everything I could do this week. We'll get to whatever we get to next week or whatever. It'll be fine anyway. Like it'll be fine, but you will feel so much better not having this internal pressure of feeling you have to get everything done as soon as possible.
Yep. I think if you try and do everything, if you try and be the person who can handle everything, you're never going to be able to. I mean, it's kind of simple as that. Like you can't be good at everything. You can't handle everything. Even if you're a one-person show, that just means that not everything's going to happen the way necessarily people want, and maybe not even the way that you want. And I mean, rest assured, most likely that's going to be for a season. It's probably not going to be forever. Yep. But you just have to be realistic with what you have. Mm-hmm. And it's just like we were saying before. Doing everything is not worth sacrificing your marriage, your family, your relationship with Jesus. It's detrimental to all those things to try and do everything. And so just trying to do everything or trying to handle everything is going to be it's going to have a negative impact on your church, which is probably the reason that you're doing it.
So maybe this is a practical example. I don't know if this is true or not, Brian, but you're doing school.
Yep.
So there's things that maybe you could do if you weren't doing school that you're not doing because you're doing school.
Sure.
And you have to be okay with it.
Yeah.
Like it's like you could beat yourself up about it, but it's like this is a time where I'm going to be spending a lot of time on this for the next year or two or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's going to take away from other things, but like that's okay.
Yeah. This happens a lot with like things I want to like learn about or kind of dive deeper into, where I'll have this idea and it's like, well, the time that I would be able to spend on this would be the mornings before people wake up, and that time is spoken for. So I guess I'm just not going to do it. Like I could find other times. I could, once my son goes to bed, I could never see my wife and just spend time on that. But like, that's not what I'm going to do. And so that's just not the way things are going to work. And this has happened with other like very very things that don't really matter. Like things, like landscape wise around the house outside, not like mowing the lawn, but like we've talked about like, yeah, it'd be cool to do these things, but then we looked at like the time that it would take to do. Yeah. And this isn't like neglecting and just letting the house go to garbage, but it's like, it's the amount of time it take to do these things and to keep up with, it's not going to be worth doing because that would be time that would kind of encroach on the time that we have together, the time we have as a family, and the trade-off just isn't worth it. And so it's just not going to happen. And sure, it's something I'd like, but it's just not going to happen. And you have to be okay with those things being the case.
Totally. So number 4, be okay doing all you can do. Number 5, prioritize life-giving ministry moments. So I would say things like pastor gatherings or ministry gatherings. Maybe if you meet with a counselor, personal meetings. This kind of maybe somewhat goes with like the big rocks. But like if there are things that give you life and give you energy and encourage you, you should prioritize putting them on your calendar. That might take away from practical work time, like getting things done. But again, if you want to be sustainable for the long haul, less is more, and this will help you get there. So a real practical example, we have a pastor's gathering we do every month. Mm-hmm. And it really bugs me. I'm judgmental and I'm a sinner. So that's on, I'm like, some of this is on me. But like when we've got some church planters planting in the area and they come every once in a while and it's like, you're not busy. You're not too busy. You're not. Yeah. But what happens is it's not prioritized. So for example, there's this one church that planted, and I'm not like knocking, and I'm not saying this pastor has to come to everything, but it's interesting to me. They planted 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And the lead pastor hardly ever comes, but like I don't know what his staff role is. He's one of the other pastors. Mm-hmm. He comes to like all of them. Yeah. And I always ask like, where is he? And he's like, oh, he had this thing planned or he's there. And I'm like, that's fine. And maybe he has this example. Maybe he has another group of pastors that he gets with regularly. And in that case, great. Yeah. But to me, I see that. I feel like this is an example of what I see often is I've got other things I have to do. I will only go to these things if I have time, which of course, if you don't schedule ahead of time, you'll never have time, even if you do have time,
Mhm.
because our time always fills up to the amount of time we get it. There's a name for that. I don't know what it's called,
Yeah.
but yeah. So like, so what happens though is after a while, if you maybe go to a conference that might be encouraging to you, or a cohort or whatever it is, like if you never do these things, you'll get discouraged. You might get burnt out. You might just, I don't know, be depressed because you haven't been places that fill your soul.
Mm.
And so putting those on the calendar, knowing it'll take away from work time, but it'll help you be sustainable for the long haul. Of course, you can't do something every single week like this.
Yeah.
But if there's like a monthly gathering, or there's something you do a couple times a year, maybe like a prayer retreat or whatever you want to do, like putting on your calendar, get less done that week, but it will help you be healthy and refreshed for the long haul.
Yeah, that's really good. So we do these monthly pastor gatherings, and especially early on, like obviously everyone has different personality, different
Yep.
things that energize them and things, and you have to figure out what works. I'm a person who's not afraid to be alone, like not afraid to work alone, or spend a lot of time on my own working. Now, that's not necessarily healthy, but it's something that I can get really I can get comfortable doing. And so especially early on, before kind of really got to know a lot of people there, I remember I would go, but not really be very excited to go. I'd be fine with going, and it was more so, honestly, it was more, one of the main reasons I went is the social pressure, like, because I didn't want to be
Peer
one of
pressure.
kind of, like, I didn't want to be one of the churches that always
Yeah.
talks about how we're a part of this, but we never actually show up to anything. And so for a while, I went, and we had friends there. It's not like I hated going,
Yeah.
but a lot of times I think, there's stuff I need to get done, and it would be more beneficial to stay back. But having
That week, it would be more beneficial to stay back.
yeah, in the short term, that was probably true. But now, having done this for a few years now, however long it's been, it's something that I look forward to now, and something that, like, I'm happy to put things aside for a little bit to go to, because I saw how beneficial it can be in the long run to have relationships with people and to get together, even if the topic we're talking about isn't necessarily relevant to something we're dealing with, or something I have a super strong, passionate feeling about. It's just good to have a break, honestly, like a break, and go and eat lunch with some buddies is kind of what sometimes it is, which is perfectly fine. It doesn't have to be something you come out with like pages of notes from. But prioritizing that, even if you don't think that it's necessarily the most important thing right then, I think is going to be really helpful in the long run.
And I think part of the reason why this gets hard is that if you are inconsistent and you don't prioritize any of these things, well, then you never build those relationships to make it worth it.
Yeah.
In the short term, it'll always not be in your best interest to go.
Yeah.
Especially if it's not something where you like learn a lot of information about, but it's just, these relationships that are valuable for the long haul, encouragement, hearing what other people are doing, whatever it is, whatever it gives you life, making sure you plan them on your monthly calendar, your yearly calendar, so that you're doing them and you're being sustained for the long term, not just trying to get through your work week this week.
Yep, exactly.
So prioritize life-giving moments. And then last but not least, number 6, have a hobby. I have finally learned how to do this. Everyone always said that this was important, and I always agreed that it was important, but then I didn't have one.
Yeah, I think that's how most people are.
And so, like, I would read, because I also have a hard time sitting still, like not doing something. So then I would read too much. Like this really hit like during COVID, like the first year, where I was like, there was less going on because things were shut down, everywhere. And I didn't have anything to do. So I was like reading all the time, and I was like, and I was bored. Like I didn't enjoy like a Sabbath. I'm like, I don't have anything that to look forward to. So just like, it wasn't fun. And then because life was boring, we were at home, and I like things to be different. Like I don't like to have everything be the same all the time. That made it even worse. And then I finally got a hobby. I bought an Xbox for the first time since high school, which I don't know if that, I mean, that it was just something fun to do.
Yeah.
I got into woodworking, which I wish I got into that year 1 of COVID, not year 2.
Yeah.
And then just recently, been talking a lot about, I got a black stone griddle.
Yep.
So I'm going to learn how to do that. But now I have these things that are fun, that I can look forward to doing, that take my mind off things, especially like the woodworking, because it's like you actually like practically, I have something to show for what I did.
Yeah.
And it's rewarding. And so now I'm one of those people that are like, having a hobby is really important. I always believed it, but I didn't have one. I think part of it is if like me, golfing I did it sometimes, but it could get expensive. So I couldn't do it all the time. But like, I didn't have anything that I was like necessarily good at. Just picking up you will enjoy stuff that you get good at as you get good at it. So picking up a new skill, it's frustrating in the beginning because you don't know how to do anything. Like with this whole grilling thing, that I'm like trying to learn how to make all this stuff. Like I'm not any good at it, so it's a little frustrating. But I know it'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
But having something that's enjoyable is just, oh my goodness, it's so important. And I didn't for like the first 3.5 years of New City, and I felt it. And now I feel like I'm in a much better place because there's at least something to look forward to. Especially if again it's the weekend. We got young kids, so it's not like we can go everywhere or do everything.
Yeah.
But having something to do for a couple hours that's enjoyable makes a big difference.
That's really funny that you mentioned the reading, because I've had a similar experience, but we never really talked about it before, where I tried to make reading tried to make that a main hobby, which for some people maybe it is, but even things not church related, faith related, even reading other things which I love, like I love to read. I found that I would try and make that my hobby, which I enjoy doing, but also you only have so much brain space. And so I would find I'd spend a lot of time reading, but then I also have a lot of reading to do for things like here, work, things that I need to be reading, things for school.
Yep.
And I found myself like, I'm not making progress in anything I'm reading, but I'm reading all the time is what I felt like. And so I realized like it's good to read. Obviously, we talked about it in our last episode, how much you should be reading. But I think it's really good to have a hobby that takes up very little brain space.
Yeah.
That isn't an avenue to learn or be smarter. And so one thing that I've got, which hasn't started yet, so we'll see if this ends up being a hobby, but I'm really looking forward to it now that the weather's getting better, is I got for free a pretty legit smoker. Someone in our neighborhood was giving it away, and I've talked to my wife for a long time about how I want to get into it, but it's kind of a lot of money to get into it, and I didn't really. It also takes a lot of time, so I was like, I don't want to spend a lot of money on something that I'm not sure if I'm going to want to stick with. Someone was giving one away for free, so I was like, I will take that, and so I got it, and I got to clean it out, and I'm going to start using it or try using it. But that is something that like I don't have to. It doesn't make me smarter.
Yes.
It doesn't make people impressed with me. Like, who cares? And if I make food that tastes like garbage, then whatever. But like, it's just something that would be purely for enjoyment.
Yes.
Which I think is really important in a hobby, to not try and make it be like, how can I make this into a side gig, or how can I learn from this, or how can this make me a better person? Like, we just need to enjoy things, and I think that's okay to admit.
And I would say this too, now that I'm starting a couple of these hobbies.
Yeah.
There is, for a lot of things, there's a financial investment. You got a free smoker, which is good.
Yes.
But for a lot of times, there's a financial investment that
sure.
starts to get that requires to get started. And I would just tell you how I cannot recommend enough doing that investment. Now, some hobbies are hard because if it's like continual, ongoing, that could be difficult. Like for my woodworking, I sell the stuff I make like on Facebook or whatever, and so like my hobby pays for itself. If not, it would look different because we don't have all this money. But even like this grill stuff, there's a lot of stuff you have to get to start. And so you have to, so I think that can help, that can stop us is like, this costs money. This also helped me though, like when with woodworking, because it was substantial investment to begin with. I was like, well, I'm paying all this money. I have to do it. Yeah. So I stuck with it enough to figure out what I was doing. And now, I'm not terrible, so it's enjoyable. Yeah. That if there's something you're interested in, but it may cost a couple $100, even up to $1,000, I would seriously consider making that investment to have something that you enjoy that can take your mind off things. And so if it's an ongoing extreme cost, then that might be different. But if it's just an initial investment to get started, golf clubs, you got to buy clubs, or I don't know, if you want to kayak or whatever, if you want to do something outdoors, there might be go camping. There might be some initial cost there. Yeah. But I'm just telling you how worth it is. So if you're on the fence, share this episode with your spouse. Say, hey, he said we should try this. Yep.
And one thing I'll add is this last point is not immune to our previous points. So in other words, if you want to create a hobby, but that hobby is only going to take place in the small amount of time that you have with your family, that is not going to be good. Like if you're working especially if you have kids, or even if you don't have kids, but if you're working during normal working hours, and then you want to come home and immediately go straight to do this thing, and your spouse never sees you, your kids never see you, that is not a healthy hobby. Like that is not how we are talking about doing things. But if you can plan it in those times and have boundaries with it that your spouse agrees with and in a healthy way, then it's super beneficial. But I could definitely see this being a cause of some of that resentment we were talking about earlier. If you never see the family, or if you rarely see the family now and use this as a way, not intentionally, but if this becomes a way to never see the family, but you have this hobby that you really enjoy.
Yeah, that's really important. I think of two things. One, if you have young kids, this is harder because, it's just more hands-on. And then also, particularly for men, they can have their hobbies. But if you wouldn't let your wife, if you're married, and they could go both ways, but if you wouldn't let your wife spend the amount of time doing what you're doing, then
that's a good point.
That could be a problem. So for me, woodworking is, Christina, I don't know. I think she thinks it's more beneficial than it is for her than I thought she did. All I'm trying to say is like I make a little bit, but not a ton.
Mhm.
And so there has been times where I was like, hey, why don't you buy? She's into baking cakes, so why don't you buy this or whatever? But
Yeah.
it's been very rare. But I guess that times have really stuck out. But that really is for me, and so it takes me a lot longer to build things because it's like 15 minutes here, 30 minutes here. Maybe on Saturday I might spend an hour at a time uninterrupted. But we've got kids; they're coming in and out. Like I can't just like shut them off from the world.
Mhm.
But this new grilling thing that I'm in, it's great. Christina's actually really excited about it because for four of the last 5 nights, I have made dinner. And so this is actually really beneficial for her. But that's a really good point. Making sure that your hobby does not take away from the things that are important.
And last thing I'll say on hobbies is encourage your spouse to have one too. Like
Yeah.
this is not like a pastor only thing and everyone else just has to like deal with. But like if you want to spend X amount of money on
Yeah.
a hobby, encourage your spouse to do it too. They may not. You're not going to force them to do it, but at least let them know that that is something that you're happy for them to do, and that you'll take the kids and watch so that they can do it and things like that. And to make it kind of a little bit more even, not just saying I want to do all these things, but I want you to just make sure it fits into our family.
Yep. Yep. So those are 6 ways to live at a sustainable pace. Hopefully this was encouraging for you to maybe think through some of these things. And we can just say it's just really important. And so maybe the younger you are, the less experience you have, the harder it is to maybe, you might intellectually believe this, but it might be hard to actually practically live it out. I'm just telling you, if you do these things for 6 months, like if you committed to doing these things for 6 months, I guarantee you after 6 months, you wouldn't need convincing. You would just do them because you would have experienced the benefits from them.
Yep.
So if you want more tips and advice, you can go to Facebook. We've got a Practical Church Planting Facebook group. So be sure to join that if you're not in it. And of course, practicalplanting.com. We've got a lot of free resources there as well. And if you want to upgrade your website or you're just getting started, thechurchco.com/practical. Put practical in the promo code at checkout. You get 40% off for 2 years, which comes to their premium package, $29 a month.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's crazy. And it is
crazy.
really good.
Yeah.
And so check that out as well. And we'll be with you next week on Practical Church Planting.